Are you tired of people telling you you're an idiot for making that risky first or second round pick? Well, I've got Chris Torres on the line today to talk about why some of these risky players may still have a place on your fantasy team. Right after this on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Welcome, everybody, to the Thursday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast, brought to you by Fantrax. Erik Halterman here with my guest, Chris Torres of the Fantasy Baseball Beat. And Chris, it's officially the start of baseball season. Spring training starts today. We've got a game between the Dodgers and Cubs. So I assume as soon as this pod is over, you're going to be scrambling over to the box score and moving a whole bunch of players by multiple rounds on your draft board. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely, man. This is what matters. This first spring training game, somebody gets a hit, I think you automatically move them up at least 2 rounds. But yeah, I appreciate you. I mean, did you plan this, Erik? Like to have me on for the official start of the baseball season? Was this like your plan all along?
We'll say yes. It's not fantasy season until Chris Torres is on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. I think that's how it works.
That is
you
right.
mentioned hits. I really want to know who gets the win. That's the real key stat. Spring training wins. That's what I
absolutely. Yep. I think that's part of my process that most people aren't on. But yeah, hopefully we can convince them to also do that. But all kidding aside, thank you so much, Erik, for having me on. This is a thrill. So yeah, just looking forward to talking some fantasy baseball here.
Yeah, we will be talking about some risky picks over the course of the next hour or so. Those divisive early round picks where you got a whole bunch of smart people saying, why in the world would you ever do that? He gets hurt. He has downsides. Well, yeah, okay, we know. But these guys have upsides too. So we're going to be talking about some of these players, trying to figure out why they still might belong on your fantasy team. But first, we've got a couple headlines that we're tracking throughout the course of the spring. Couple storylines here, including Jose Altuve playing some left field this spring. It looks like his first spring game is going to come in left field. I guess probably we don't need to adjust Altuve's ranking very much. I mean, he'll probably pick up outfield eligibility if the Astros are serious about this, but that's not a major boost. But how do you see this impacting the rest of the Astros depth chart? I mean, we're going to get more Mauricio Dubon, Brendan Rodgers. Are there names here that we should really be interested in with this potential move?
I mean, I don't think there's a ton of fantasy relevance there. I mean, I think this indicates that Brendan Rodgers, as of now, is probably the opening day second baseman. So I don't think that's too exciting. Even when he was on the Rockies, he's a guy that doesn't really steal bases and, he'll have a plus average, give you, 10 to 15 home runs, but nothing that's really going to move the needle for fantasy. I'm pulling up roster resource now. It looks like they still have Altuve at second base. Yeah, maybe it does mean a little bit more playing time for Mauricio Dubon there as well, but another guy who is not really that fantasy relevant. Maybe if you're in a draft and hold or a deep league, you move him up a little bit, but not really doing much for me there. As far as Altuve, I think if you're drafting him where he's currently going, you're playing him at second base. I don't think Altuve's profile really is what you're looking for at that point in the draft from an outfielder. But I am looking forward to seeing him running around the outfield. I just think that's going to kind of look funny. He's obviously smaller guy. I don't think we've seen many 5'6" players out in the outfield. So I'm just looking forward to that more than anything, seeing him run out there, and it'll be entertaining, I think.
Somebody needs to write an article on how many left fields Jose Altuve could rob a home run at. I want to see that research. Another potential position change to keep an eye on this spring, Rafael Devers. Maybe he's not going to change positions. It seems like he sure doesn't want to. He's adamant about sticking at third base even after the team added Alex Bregman. But the latest wrinkle that I wanted to bring up here is that we've got a note saying Devers has been doing separate infield and cage work away from the other Red Sox players as he continues to build up strength following last year's shoulder injuries. That doesn't sound like somebody who necessarily should be playing third base, a position where you kind of need your shoulder, to me. So this is just going to be one of those storylines that I think is going to keep going for most of the spring, I would think. How do you see this playing out? Do you see any opportunities for players to get more playing time than we thought? Or do you think that this is just going to be, what Devers wants it to be? Is it going to be Devers at third and Bregman at second and no room for the young guys?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing we have to watch is how this plays out in terms of how it impacts a guy like Christian Campbell. Um, I thought that they were kind of paving the way for him to eventually take that job at second base. If Devers doesn't move off of third, that means you got Bregman there now at second, so that would seemingly block Campbell. This whole situation is just kind of weird. Uh, I really think from everything that I've read and heard, like they want Campbell on the big league club. He was exceptional last year at all levels of the minor leagues. It seemed like he was on the fast track, and just logically, it doesn't make sense to stall him and just keep him in AAA at this point. So I don't know. I have a feeling that there's something in the works that's still, like some kind of trade. I honestly wouldn't be surprised to see a guy like Casas moved out. Seems like he's kind of worn out his welcome in Boston just with some of his comments and his behavior. And he's not a guy that was chosen by this regime. He was a guy that Chaim Bloom had picked. So I don't know. I don't know how this plays out, but I'll buy the dip though, I think, on Christian Campbell, because everything I'm hearing is that this guy is a budding superstar. And if he's playing well, even if he starts the year in AAA, I know he has eligibility or he has some experience at other positions as well. I think the Red Sox are going to find a way to get him in the major leagues at some point. So I think that's really the biggest fallout. And just quickly on Devers, I have no Devers in any of the drafts that I've done so far. I mean, there had been a lot of talk at the end of the season about his shoulders, and man, when I hear shoulders and hitter, especially power hitter, like I'm just not. I'm steering clear of that, especially given the price he was going at in draft, or he is going at in drafts. And yeah, especially now, like with the shoulders, with the bad vibes, he's just a do not draft for me at this point.
Yeah, I had been landing Devers a decent amount in some of my early drafts, and I wasn't totally satisfied with that. I wondered if there was something I was just not accounting for that led to him continuing to fall to me. And I think I was just not penalizing him enough for fears of this shoulder and the fact that he's already on a slightly different trajectory from the rest of his team due to that shoulder. I mean, certainly it could just be he needs 1 week at the start of camp where he's easing it in, and then he'll be totally fine for the whole season. But this is definitely at least a yellowish orange flag, I would say. Let's stick within the NL East and talk about your Yankees for a second. The back of the Yankees rotation, it should be Clark Schmidt, I think, as the 5, and Marcus Stroman, who is not a reliever, trying to figure out what that means as the number 6. But Clark Schmidt is dealing with back issues. Now, it seems pretty minor. He's going to throw a bullpen session Friday. But Schmidt hasn't necessarily been the most durable. What would happen if Clark Schmidt isn't ready to go? Is it just Marcus Stroman for a bit, and then we'll see what happens? And are you into Schmidt, though, if he does end up proving that this is a minor problem?
Not really. I mean, and I hate it because I like the skills. I mean, he really took a step forward last year, but as we know, he missed a lot of time last season. Last year, I believe it was with a lat strain, and just coming up through, from college through the minors through the majors, like he's had a lot of injuries, and some guys just don't have the body or the mechanics or what, off the field regimen that's going to keep them healthy. And I think Schmidt can kind of be put into that bucket now of there seems to be some kind of injury proneness there. So I'm probably steering clear at this point. He's going like early 200s in some of these early drafts, and I'm not willing to take that risk. As far as what happens if he's not in the rotation to start the year, I imagine like if this is why they have Stroman, right? Like I guess this would be the path for him to be in the rotation and be happy with his role. He said he's not going to the bullpen. I don't think he has much fantasy relevance, maybe some cheap wins, but I really think I hated the signing last year and it played out pretty much exactly how I thought it would, and not really interested in him. I will give one name though that I am really getting a lot of interest in is Will Warren. Is a guy who right now, I mean, he's behind Stroman. He would be technically the SP7 on this team. But if Stroman gets dealt or Schmidt or, the Yankees do have some injury prone guys in their rotation, I think he could really be a factor. If you look at his numbers when he came up last year, I mean, he had a terrible ERA, but look deeper than that. He had, I believe it was around a 27% strikeout percentage. So really solid stuff, and it just got pretty unlucky. And that was a continuation from what he did in AAA last season. So, and the stuff numbers are really good. He's one of the Yankees' highest ranked prospects. I really think there's a path for Will Warren to be a major contributor this season. And he's going at a price right now that, he's going in these drafting holds, like around pick 600, 690, I think was the ADP. I think he's definitely a buy. He's a great late round flyer that you should be taking.
All right, Will Warren, a name to keep in mind, certainly throughout this spring as we see the injuries start to pile up in various rotations. Learn to get to know those 6th, 7th, 8th starters, because some of them, like Will Warren, might be getting chances sooner than we expected. Let's move over to the main topic of the day, our divisive picks. Some of these guys who have massive downsides, who your league mates are going to tell you, why did you pick him? You're an idiot. But there are reasons why these guys are going incredibly early in drafts, and that's because the upside is huge as well. And collectively, people seem to think that the upside and downside, if you weigh them together, they still add up to someone who should be going on someone's team in the first few rounds. Doesn't have to be yours. You can be someone who says, I take no risks early. I don't want to lose my draft. I'm a good player. I can find players late in drafts to make up for it. But Chris, I'm having you as the guest for today because I'm pretty sure that's not your take. Just judging by some of the draft boards you have been sharing on Twitter and that sort of thing, you are willing to take players with downside. So why don't you tell me a little bit about why you're still willing to do that when a lot of people seem to be moving towards the no risks early, win your draft late model?
I'm a believer, and this is for everything in life. Everything in moderation, man. Like I think in a fantasy baseball draft, like I think it makes sense to take some risks, right? But not to just go, well, I'm going to take all the risks, right? I'm just going to build a team of all of these types of players with injury history or skills risk or whatever. Like I think if you're going to take risk, I think you just balance it out later with more stable profiles. So, and the reality is that, these types of players, I'll give you an example from the past 2 years. Like 2 years ago, there was questions around Ronald Acuna's health, right? Like, is he, is his style of play, does that make him more injury prone, whatever. I was one of those guys who faded Acuna, and he went on to have an all-time season 2 years ago. Last year was Ohtani. Well, is he fully healthy? There's some risks there. Is he gonna there was the gambling thing, which is a whole nother topic. But sometimes you just have to lean into it, because if you faded Ohtani, as did I last year, you missed out on another all-time great season. So I think it makes sense to kind of just have a balanced approach, right? Take some risk, but also balance it out with guys that are quote unquote safe. I think sometimes we could get a little carried away with that label. Sometimes that label, like, it's just, we're kind of going on vibes with a lot of this in terms of labeling guys risky versus not risky. So yeah, I think it just makes sense to have a balanced approach and just kind of diversify. Especially the other thing too is this year I'm probably doing like 10 to 15 drafts. So I'm okay taking a Jazz in 1 or 2 drafts. I'm okay taking a Tatis in 1 or 2 drafts, because I know like they're just going to be a percentage of my portfolio. So I think that also is a caveat that needs to be considered. Like, what kind of volume are you playing? If you're doing one league, I think it makes sense. Like, if you're doing one league where, it's a high entry fee, then yeah, probably go a little bit safer. But when you have the approach that I do, then I think it makes sense to have exposure to some of these quote unquote risky players.
All right, I think you've made a great case for why it certainly makes sense in the right situation to take maybe all of the guys that we're going to talk about today. I did not clear all these names with you. I don't know if these are all specific risks you're interested in taking, but let's get right into it. You've already mentioned the first guy on the list here, Fernando Tatis Jr. Now, in the first round this year, there's a lot of risks. There are certainly some very safe players, like, say, Bobby Witt Jr. is probably as safe as it gets. Gunnar Henderson, he's pretty close. But, whoever's taking Shohei Ohtani or Aaron Judge in the top 3 picks, they're taking on a lot of risk there. Whoever's taking the pitchers, Paul Skeens, Tarek Skubal, taking on a lot of risk with a first-round starting pitcher. But Fernando Tatis Jr., I think he is a pretty divisive guy here as well. I have been willing to take him, but I don't know how good I feel about it because the only time he really performed like a genuine first rounder was before that PED suspension. So am I a fool for still ranking Fernando Tatis in the middle to the back of the first round, or do you think that that's absolutely where he belongs? This is a uber talented, still very young superstar. What are you thinking? Of course he's a first rounder.
I think he's appropriately priced, to be honest. The skills we know are off the charts, though they're not as strong as they were prior to the PED suspension, as you mentioned. But yeah, I think the talent that he has is worthy. Like it's a top of the first round talent, and you're probably getting a discount of 5 or 6 spots because of the questions around his health. And those are valid questions. I mean, if you look at his injury history, there's all kinds of injuries. Last year, he had a stress reaction in his femur, which kept him out for a good chunk of time. I mean, he's had injuries to his shoulder, his back, his wrist. Some of those were a little bit fluky, but there's just every year it's something with him. The other thing you have to consider with Tatis that maybe it's not a physical injury risk. There's a little bit of kind of like a knucklehead factor with him. Obviously
Right.
he got this PED suspension. He had the injury that he suffered while riding a motorcycle, and things I've read about him that he's kind of just his personality maybe can rub people the wrong way. It gives me the sense that there's instability in that, just his profile, overall. So I think that's something to be considered. I personally, so I mentioned him as a guy that I have him on one team, and honestly, I'm okay with that. I would feel a little bit uneasy if I went into the year with no Tatis, because I think there is the upside scenario that you get the Ronald Acuna season from 2 years ago where he just decides he's going to destroy the game of baseball and go whatever it was 40, 50, 60 or that's in the range of outcomes. So I need a little bit of exposure, but the injuries every year is something that for the most part is going to keep me off of him.
Yeah, I think that's fair. As you mentioned, a lot of different risks in a lot of different directions at once, different injuries, the knucklehead factor, as you mentioned. Maybe we could say he's probably growing out of that somewhat. I mean, some of that came from the fact that he debuted so young. And we don't often see 20-year-olds with the camera in front of them for that much of their lives. And what do you know? He looked 20, and then he looked 21, and then he looked 22. But now he's, 26, maybe a few years older than that. Maybe that's decreasing, although I could understand not wanting to assume that that's just going to be the case with your first round pick. So,
right. And I just wanted to quickly point out, Eric.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to. My co-host Dave Funnel, who does a great job covering injuries, he'll sometimes put together these charts which outline all of the a player's injury history. He put out a tweet yesterday with Tatis's, and I mean it's a long list, right? All kinds of different injuries. So partially just wanted to make that point regarding Tatis, but also plugging my co-host Dave Funnel. He does great work covering all of the injuries and things that we should be aware of. So definitely go check him out on Twitter if you're not already.
Yeah, thanks for that call. I guess you mentioned the variety of different injuries. I suppose we're going to be talking about a bunch of guys who have had long injury track records, and a variety is preferable, I think, to one body part giving out over and over again, right? So even though Tatis finds himself on the shelf as a lot, at least it's a motorcycle crash one year and it's a broken whatever it was, or a stress reaction in his quad last year. At least those things are presumably unrelated. It's not good, but it's better than the alternative.
Mm-hmm. Yep, agreed.
Speaking of guys who get hurt a lot, next on the list is Chisholm Jr., who is going as a mid-second rounder. He's somebody who's thought to have this kind of talent for years, but before last season, his career high in games played was 124. He reached 147 last year, and he gave us 24 homers and 40 steals. So the upside is that, I would say. I mean, you can understand why he's going that far, or that early, I should say. Is that correct? Do you think Jazz Chisholm is a legitimate mid-second round talent? We've seen what he can do, and the injury risk is overstated, or do you think that people are dreaming?
Before I answer that, I just got 2 notifications on my phone. So I do get RotoWire notifications. So pretty cool. Risky picks with Chris Torres is a notification I get. All right. I like that. The other notification I get, we were joking about the impact of the first game of the year. There was actually MLB Trade Rumors sent a notification that Yamamoto hits 96 miles per hour on his first pitch of spring. Move him up, baby. Move him up. We're going now. Third round.
Yeah, as long as he gets a win too. If he gets a win,
right.
A bonus round beyond that.
That's how starved for baseball we are, that we're literally tweeting the velocity of the first pitch from Yamamoto. Man, we're desperate over here. But anyway, getting to Jazz. I am much more in on Jazz. So I sounded kind of down on Tatis. I feel differently about Jazz. And I think I had one of the min picks on him in one of my DCs. And I remember getting some heat because I posted it and people were like, what are you doing taking Jazz that early? There's a player currently going in the first round that I think Jazz comps really well to, yet we don't hear really the same level of concern about this player. I'm going to throw this to you, Erik. Who do you think that is? Who do you think is a good Jazz comp going in the first?
And are you talking about a skill set comp or a durability?
Yeah, a guy who has a similar skills profile that, I think has similar risk, but doesn't have the same reputation as
looking at guys, more of a 20-40 type player. Mm-hmm. Maybe is that Corbin Carroll? Is that who you're thinking of?
Absolutely.
Or? All right.
If you look at just the underlying skills, look at contact rate, look at hard hit, barrels, stolen base attempt, all of that. Corbin Carroll and Jazz Chisholm really aren't that different. I understand Jazz has the injury history, right? Was mostly healthy though last year. He did have the one injury to his shoulder, I believe, or shoulder or wrist. I'm not 100%, but it was a play where he was diving in on like a stolen base or trying to get an extra base. So it was kind of like a little bit fluky. It wasn't like a soft tissue injury. Jazz did everything last year that we wanted him to. He stayed mostly healthy. His contact rate went up by 7%. Now he went from Miami, one of the worst parks, one of the worst lineups. Now he's moving to one of the best parks, especially for his swing, to a much better lineup in the Yankees. And we're really I feel like people are still like, I don't know about Jazz. He's a little, there's too many kind of question marks about him. I don't really have any. I mean, the other thing too, the bonus for him, multi-position eligibility, man. Third base, outfield, most likely getting second base. Especially I've been doing DC, so getting him into DC, I feel like is kind of like a little bit of a cheat code to have that optionality, right? You get him in the second round and yeah, you could go in a different direction. If a third baseman falls to you, then fine. Jazz is going to be my second baseman. So, and vice versa. So I'm all about it. I think we could see, I wouldn't be shocked if we get a 30-50 season from Jazz. I know that sounds like that's a bold prediction. I'm not expecting that, but I think that's firmly in the range of outcomes. I mean, he was running wild when he went over to the Yankees last year. I know most projection systems have him in that 25 to 28 home run range. I think he could pop another, 2 to 3 to get him to that 30 mark. Imagine what where we're taking Jazz if he goes 30, even 30, 40. There's just not many players that have that in their bag. And the average I know can be a little bit risky, but we're taking Corbin Carroll a pick, in the middle of the first round. He batted 231 last year. Is Jazz going to, I don't think Jazz is going to do any worse than that. So yeah, sign me up for Jazz at his price. I think if you're getting him at the end of the second round, I think he's a smash.
Yeah, I hear your case. We've got some pushback in the chat here saying that Jazz has so much more swing and miss in his game than Carroll. He does swing and miss more than Carroll, but he also does hit the ball harder. They're not exactly identical players, but in terms of guys who are probably more like 25-40 than 35-35, like some of the first rounders.
Well, I just want to respond. I want to respond quickly to that. So I agree there's more swinging strike with Jazz, but something that I think is important that a couple years ago didn't really look at, but I've been doing more in recent years, is looking at swing decisions. And Corbin Carroll, though he makes better contact, he's also much more passive. And I think that can lead to an elevated strikeout rate that isn't, quite, or not so much a strikeout rate, but the average risk is high when you have a guy who's just not taking advantage of pitches that he can do damage on. Pulling it up here. So Corbin Carroll, 61% in zone swing percentage. So I think that does put him at a little bit more risk. In terms of average. Last year, Jazz batted 256, Carroll 231. Some of that is luck, but I don't think there's a huge difference at the end of the year in terms of where they're at in average. And that's a category. Like, that makes it a difference. So not the same profile. I recognize that, but I think the skill set in terms of home runs, stolen bases are going to be pretty similar.
All right. And one other comment in the chat here I want to mention from Dave McDonald saying it's not about number of injuries, it's whether they're reoccurring and whether they got proper treatment or if they just rested. You're looking for what will affect them moving forward. And now with Jazz, I don't really see recurring injuries, and I don't really see one big one that he didn't get treated. So I think that even though he has been on the shelf a lot, and we have to account for that, right? We assume he's the sort of player who, goes really hard and gets himself into situations where he might get hurt. All right, I'm willing to call him an elevated injury risk, but I'm not seeing the signs for, an extreme do not draft level of injury risk like we might have with the next guy here, Ronald Acuna, who just keeps tearing his ACLs. I mean, that's unfortunately a very major injury that's now reoccurring. I guess here Dave is pushing back saying there are a lot of lower body injuries for Jazz like Mike Trout. So that is fair. We should point out when there are injuries in the same general area, but it's not as if he has, knees that just seemingly can't hold up to a full baseball season, like sadly might be the case with Ronald Acuna. So if we move on to Acuna here, is he a risk that you're willing to take? For myself, I am just really worried about a guy who just keeps blowing out his knees and is going to start the year on the IL. I'm just thinking I don't need to take this chance, but do you think it's still one worth making in certain circumstances?
Yeah, I'm not about Acuna this year. I know, like, if you plug his projection into like an SGP or some type of auction calculator, he's going to come out as a major value based on where he's being drafted. And I just, the projections, they don't quite, I don't think we're at the point where they can really quantify a player like Acuna and his risk. Like you said, now both knees, he's had the surgery on. We also had the quote the other day where he said he's not going to be as aggressive stealing bases. I'm sure the Braves are going to put a cap on that. He's already going to miss a month, maybe more. Like there are just too many questions around Acuna that I don't have any Acuna, and I doubt I'll have any moving forward.
Yeah, I've been shocked at just how early some of the auction calculators and the projection systems say he should be going. Like, I think Steamer has him as the fourth best hitter.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of others are in that range, but they're assuming what? They're assuming more plate appearances than we're willing to give him. They're assuming more running, and they're just assuming he's definitely going to get back to his level. I mean, even if you're in a league, say, where steals aren't that important, so whether or not he runs doesn't matter as much if you're in some sort of points league, say, well, even there, how sure are we that Ronald Acuna is going to hit like he used to, right? There's
Right.
just so many different things that could go wrong coming off a second torn ACL. I mean, would you take him, say, in a league with IL spots and playoffs so that, all right, he'll probably be back by September? Are there certain circumstances, where you think, all right, fine, I probably would take a shot there?
Maybe if it's like a super shallow league and have an IL spot, maybe. But yeah, I'm just not, my mindset is so like on these 15 teamers that I really haven't even thought about him because I'm not holding Acuna on my bench for a month plus. And then not knowing what I'm getting when he comes back. And just, I know you said like what are the projection systems, like how many plate appearances. So the Bat X right now has him for 454 at bats, 25 home runs, 70 RBIs, 37 stolen bases with a 298 average. So that if you plug him into an auction calculator would make him the fourth overall player. And I really think they're really overestimating the stolen bases. But again, these projection systems don't they're just going to use the last couple years of data and they're not going to adjust for some of the concerns that we have or the quotes that he's saying he's not going to be as aggressive. So, and we've already seen Acuna year one after a major injury, like he wasn't the same player, right?
Right.
So I think it's a stretch to assume that he's just going to hit the ground running, literally and figuratively. So I'm out. I just don't need that on my team. I have other ways that I feel like I can win.
All right, so we're not going to be positive about everybody today, and that's perfectly fine. We don't want to be blindly optimistic about everyone, certainly not. I'm going to group these next two hitters together because I think the risks are pretty similar. Oneil Cruz and James Wood, two absolutely massive men, 6'7" outfielders who have the profile you would expect. They can hit the ball really hard, but also can't always get those long levers to make contact with the ball. Pretty big strikeout issues with both of them. Cruz is a little bit further in his career. We actually saw him debut with 2 games all the way back in 2021, and then some injury issues before he could really get established. But he had basically a full, nearly healthy season last year, 146 games, and gave us 21 homers, 22 steals. James Wood, a similar player in a lot of ways, maybe even a bigger prospect, but earlier in his trajectory. He's just turning 22 late last season, gave us about half a year. Are you into these two players as very early picks who have, that really major strikeout downside and not a lot of proven track record, but man, the thought of a 6'7" guy who hits the ball this hard, taking some steps forward with that contact. I mean, it's not hard to envision these guys as, potential first rounders in the future. Where are you on these two giants?
So I'm mixed. Let's start with Oneil Cruz. He's someone I am in on. I kind of, he's someone that I will take at cost or at a slight discount. I'm not going to reach for Oneil Cruz because I'm like, oh, this is definitely the breakout. But if it's the right spot and my first 2 picks set me up for it, then I'm cool taking him in the third. In one draft, I got him in the 4th round, which I thought was a smash there. So Cruz, I really like taking players like the second year off of a major injury. We know 2 years ago he missed most of the year, had that awful ankle injury. Going into last year, I was totally out because I'm like, this guy missed the whole year. I don't know. Is he going to steal bases at the same rate? Like, is this going to be the same player right off the bat? And he really wasn't. But what we did see in the second half is that he was much more aggressive on the base paths. His stolen base attempt rate, according to Baseball HQ, went from 11% to 22% in the second half. So that indicates to me that he finally, he had gotten up to speed, was feeling healthy, And, this was really his opportunity to take advantage of these new stolen base rules, because the first year of them, he was out most of it. So I think there's a good chance that he carries over that aggressiveness on the base pass, and that we could see a 30 stolen base season from Oneil Cruz. He was only caught one time last year. So the fact that he has been efficient, I wouldn't expect him to maintain that level of efficiency, but I think the Pirates are going to be more inclined to let him run, especially out the gate, if he is going to be that efficient. So, and the power we know is just massive. Guy has some of the highest barrel rates, hard hit rates. And I think a 30-30 season, this would be my bold prediction for Oneil Cruz. I think we do see a 30-30 season from him. I'm hoping to see a little bit more of a step forward in terms of his performance against lefties. That's, I think, the one hole in his game right now. He took a step forward last year, but I think I have to see it for another year to fully buy in that's real. But yeah, there's just not many players in the pool that have, a 30-30 in their range of outcomes. And Oneil Cruz going at pick 43 over these past 17 DC since the beginning of February. I'm in. I think that's the right price. He's also got the multi-position eligibility, shortstop and outfield, which is just a nice little bonus. So I am in on Cruz.
All right, then what about Wood here? We've got a PJ in the chat saying, well, how does Wood go ahead of Lawrence Butler? That's an interesting one. Lawrence Butler, not somebody on our list today. We could consider him a risky player because he's not that proven, but he's somebody who could give you power and speed and maybe average as well. So James Wood, you said you were in on Cruz. Are you in on the similarly shaped James Wood or not yet?
Not really. And what's interesting, that's an interesting comment, because if you look at their projections and plug them into an auction calculator between Wood and Butler, they really come out around the same range. If you're using a projection system, in this case, I'm using the BATX. I think Wood is a little too expensive. Just given the lack of track record, there were some issues with him hitting the ball on the ground a lot, which was a continuation of what he was doing in AAA last year. So I don't know if that's just something like he's going to fix right away, which obviously will cap the power ceiling for him. There's also he's another guy who's way too passive with pitches in the zone, which I know a lot of people don't look at this stat. And I'm out on an island with this. I literally have not heard one person that uses this, but I think it does matter a little bit. You know how we look at pitcher CSW percentage and we kind of look at, all right, we want a guy who's in that 30% range. I actually do that with hitters as well. Someday I'm going to write an article about this, Eric, and I'm going to prove that there's something predictive about this, because I think it does encapsulate a player's swing decisions. And James Wood had one of the highest CSWs for a hitter last season, up in the almost 33%.
Just a real quick interjection for people who don't know, CSW, called strikes plus whiffs. Mm-hmm. So all of the complete wins for a pitcher is the way I like to think of it.
Yep. So yeah, it just, again, is going to show you, even if a player, I started looking at this because I was looking a couple years ago at a guy like Dan Vogelbach or Kevin Biggio. I'm like, these guys don't really swing and miss. So why are their K rates so high? And, you saw that they were taking a lot of called strikes, and you could see that quickly if you just looked at their CSW percentage. So James Wood was up at 32.8%. Combine that with the high ground ball rate, the lack of track record. If he was going a couple rounds later, I'd be in, but he's going in the 4th, 5th round. And usually at that point, I'm looking to get SP1, SP2, or a closer. I'm just not really even shopping for bats in that range. So I haven't landed on Wood in any of my drafts so far. And I doubt that I will moving forward.
All right. We've gone over a bunch of risky hitters in the top 50 or so picks. I've got a couple more hitters and then a bunch of risky pitchers to talk about right after this message from our sponsor, Fantrax. Fantrax is the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. Coming from another service, Fantrax makes it easy. Fantrax can import any of your current leagues and customize if needed. Fantrax offers the most in-depth player pool in the industry, including minor league players. Do you need a customizable commissioner service for your fantasy league? Fantrax offers more customization than any other platform. Waivers, categories, scoring system, schedule. Fantrax offers custom solutions for all that and more. And it's all free. Sign up for free today and be entered to win an official MLB signed jersey from Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Simply go to fantrax.com/rotowire and sign up today. That's fantrax.com/rotowire. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. We're also brought to you by Edge Boost. Have you ever had your debit card declined or had to call your bank at 3 a.m. in Vegas? Edge Boost is the first consumer-facing online bank dedicated to the gaming industry. There are numerous benefits to using Edge Boost at $250,000 per day in debit deposits, unlimited withdrawals, cash back on sports betting, DFS sweeps, 100% approval for all gaming activity, financial segmentation for discretion and responsible gaming, compatible today for prediction markets, iCasino, DFS, sports betting, lottery, brick and mortar casinos, horse racing, and sweeps. No transaction reviews or account freezes. Visit edgeboost.bet today and use promo code ROTOPOD. That's promo code ROTOPOD. Welcome back to the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast. Erik Halterman and my guest, Chris Torres. Today, we've been going over some of the risky picks in the early rounds, some guys with big upside and big downside. We're mostly just going to move on to pitchers for the rest of the show, but I wanted to mention one last hitter since we've got a guy with a Yankee hat on the show today. I want to talk about Cody Bellinger, who probably a different sort of divisive pick than the ones we've talked about before. There's been a period of Bellinger's career where injuries were the main storyline, but I don't really think that is at this point. At this point, the risk with Cody Bellinger, the thing that's dividing people, is we don't really know how good he is at this stage of his career after he's back from the terrible slumps he was in after the injury in 2021 and 2022. He's now had 2 years where he's, I guess, pretty good. I don't really even know what adjective to use to describe, but he's going right around the top 100 now that he's moved to a park that's perfect for left-handed power in Yankee Stadium. So is this a year where we should be on Cody Bellinger, or is he just kind of a bland nobody at this point and he should be on somebody else's team?
I lean towards the latter. And yeah, I'm wearing the Yankee hat, but I'm probably harder on Yankee players than I am on other players. So there's no favoritism for anybody just because they're wearing the pinstripes. With Bellinger, I think, like you said, he has been fine for the past couple years, and I think this is the new Cody Bellinger, right? I don't think the 2019 Bellinger or even 2020, when he was just mashing the ball, I don't think that guy is coming back. I think what he did is he made an intentional approach, or changed his approach to be more of like a contact oriented guy, especially after that dismal year he had when we were like, is this guy just going to like flame out of baseball? I think he went to just being, again, more contact oriented, and that's served him fine, right? So I don't see like all of a sudden he's going to be taking like big hacks and going for the right field wall. Like this is what's, kept him in the game. And you see it in his contact rates. Like, yeah, they've gone up every year, but so his hard hit rate has also gone in the other direction. So last year, according to StatCast, his hard hit rate was 32%. Barrel rate of 6%, which was pretty much in line, almost identical to what he had in 2023. So I don't know how much the change in ballpark is really gonna. I don't think that's necessarily just going to totally change the trajectory of his career. Like I think we'll probably see something similar. The fact that he will chip in stolen bases, I think, is important for our game, right? Like getting 10 to 15, maybe even 20 on the Yankees, that matters. So I'm not just going to say, well, he's a terrible pick. I just probably won't be going in that direction because I think based on what we could expect from him, we're probably paying a little bit too much. We're paying that Yankees tax because everybody's thinking about that short porch. And I don't know if that's enough to justify, where he's currently going.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. So Bellinger didn't totally fit the theme of today in terms of that high floor, low ceiling, but just in terms of players you might pick in the first 100 picks where your league mates are saying, why in the world are you picking him so early? I think he does fit there, and you and I would be your league mates in that case. Let's move to the mound. where we'll get back to the theme of very high ceiling, very low floor. Garrett Crochet, I think, is the first one to talk about here. Garrett Crochet might be the best pitcher in baseball. I don't think that's too extreme. I mean, Paul Skeens is still here, but Garrett Crochet in the first half, his numbers were right up there with anybody. But that was also his first year as a starter. He threw 146 innings the year before. Between the majors and the minors, it looks like he threw 25. So quite a massive innings jump. We have no idea if Garrett Crochet can hold up for multiple years as a starter. But if he does, you might get the SP1. So are you taking a chance on Garrett Crochet as your fantasy ace in late second, early third round?
I do have a couple shares. Probably will be my last shares because I think I'm just going to get priced out. I was taking him, because I'm a sicko. I know we talked when we were in Arizona. I was in a draft when we were out there in early November. Which, by the way, I think you got me on Ryan Helsley in like not Ryan Helsley, Ryan Presley in like the 47th round. So thank you for that, because that really worked out well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was taking him in the 4th in one draft. I took him late 3rd in another. And I already know, like, as I gear up for these main event drafts, like he's going to be going probably early 2nd, maybe push into the 1st round. And I'm just not willing to pay that price. That might be a mistake. I'll be fully transparent. Like, I'm not sure if that's the right call, but it does bother me that there is such a significant jump in his innings. I don't think the park is really, it wasn't the ideal landing spot. Let's put it that way. Better than the White Sox just because of the win potential. But I also don't love, I saw the other day that he was hitting 99 miles per hour out of the gate in spring training. Why? Why are you throwing 99 miles per hour on February 17th? Like some of these guys, I know we'll talk about deGrom, like they're killers out there, man. Like they want to eat your soul. But that could be a problem at times because they don't know how to tone it down and keep themselves healthy. So yeah, I probably, at the price that I'm expecting him to be in these upcoming drafts, I probably won't have any more Crochet.
All right, let's go to a fellow former White Sox lefty who also fits the theme of today's show, Chris Sale. Going around pick 43 in DCs over the last month or so. Chris Sale had several years where he was dealing with injuries on and off. He had, let's see, it was 27 starts in 2018, then 25, and then none in 2020, and then 9 and 2, and then 20. So the last time he had made 30 starts was 2017. I guess that's still true. He only made it up to 29 last year. Some back issues at the end of the year. So there's still a case to be made that Chris Sale is dealing with some sort of injuries. But man, the performance over the bulk of the season was vintage Chris Sale. And there was none of the serious elbow shoulder type stuff there. So if you're willing to believe that Chris Sale is past that period of his career and that this wasn't just a 1-year window where everything lined up perfectly, then you're getting one of the best pitchers in baseball in, the late 3rd round or so. Is that where you sit? Do you think Chris Sale is back to being the ace and, he's got some injury risk, but not really more than other pitchers? Or do you think that people are crazy for taking him this early?
I don't think you're crazy if you take him. There are plenty of picks on the board that I think are legitimately crazy. I don't put Sale into that category. I think he's fairly priced based on what he did last year, but the risk that he presents. I don't like the fact that he didn't finish the season, right, and that he didn't pitch in a must-win game. He wasn't going to pitch in the playoffs. I know they say he's fine now and he had a normal offseason. But man, like if I zoom out and just like, if I didn't know the player's name and you told me, listen, there's a 35-year-old pitcher who had a back problem that he couldn't pitch at the end of last season, do you want that guy? My answer would be no, right? Like I know it's Chris Sale, and he's, borderline Hall of Fame pitcher, but just given the age and given the uncertainty around, a back issue is a serious thing, especially for a player of that age. I'm just steering clear. Just don't want to mess with it.
Could he do anything this spring to convince you that, yeah, no, the back issue really is last year's problem? I mean, he's supposed to make a start this Saturday. What if he gets through that start fine? What if he gets through his next one fine? Would you be willing to move him up the board at that point? Or is a back issue something that you expect is going to pop up, in May and affect him throughout the year from that point?
It's a fair question. I'm just stubborn. I'm
Fair enough.
I'm just gonna say no. Like I just don't. I don't want to mess with it. I think again there are other guys. There's a lot of good pitchers in that range that ultimately I'm just gonna say I don't think Chris Sale skill wise is that much better. And I just like every time I see like if I see a notification and see Chris Sale's name in it, like my heart's gonna drop. I already know what that's gonna be like in season, so I just don't want. I don't want the hassle. I don't want the headache of having him on my team. Maybe that's wrong, but that's where the direction I'm going.
Fair enough. I think you could say the same thing about notifications making your head drop with the next guy, Jacob deGrom. But I know that you have drafted him based on some of your early draft boards. You are one of the people willing to take Jacob deGrom, and I suppose there's a reading of his last several years which says that, he kept missing time because he had an elbow injury and then he got elbow surgery and he's back from surgery. So he's fine. He's Jacob deGrom. Is that basically your reading? Do you think that he is much more healthy than people are giving him credit for? Or do you think he's Jacob deGrom? He doesn't actually need to be that healthy to still justify this very early pick?
Both.
All right. Fair.
Both. Yeah. I mean, I think people still have this idea in their head. Maybe they stopped paying attention last year. They switched over to football or whatever. Like they still think he's like coming off the injury. No, he came back last year. deGrom, like we saw what deGrom looked like. Right. And he was still Jacob deGrom. Like if you look at his numbers, like all the underlying stuff numbers, no matter what model you use, like the skills were otherworldly. They were still there. The strikeout numbers were still there. If we hadn't seen deGrom at the end of last year and we were going into this season not really knowing what we were getting, I understand his ADP would be lower, but I probably be like, I don't really want to mess with it. Kind of like what I was saying with Sale. Like I want to steer clear. But we saw him, and I don't think there's any concern as far as like a dramatic drop off from what he was. And I think the Rangers are just going to let him go. Maybe they limit his pitch count like in the beginning, or maybe it's like a 4 or 5 inning start, like his first couple. But if he's healthy, I think he's going. And let me tell you now, if you don't have deGrom on any of your teams and deGrom is healthy, you are going to regret that. I mean, the guy is just, I know people talk about like the 2 Tommy John surgeries. Like there's not a great track record with that. None of those guys that have had 2 Tommy Johns were Jacob deGrom. This guy is maybe the most talented pitcher we've ever seen. Like his peak was as good as anybody. I still think he's got another monster season left in him. He's only 36, and I don't really think for a guy that's an outlier like that means he's like old or over the hill. Like I still think that he's going to be himself. And dude, he grew out the hair like you saw the picture of him. He's got the locks flowing. Like this dude is ready to just dominate. And I'm not going to have like, 75% deGrom exposure, but he is one of the risky guys that I'm okay having a little bit higher exposure than I normally would with a risky, quote unquote, risky player.
All right, you've made a pretty strong case there for deGrom. I'll give some of the pushback here from Dave in the chat.
I knew Dave was coming in with some pushback.
There you go. Was he Jacob deGrom in his last 3 starts? That's the pushback here. The swinging strikes were a bit down. The strikeout rate, was 31% rather than 38% like he often is. Also, it was 3 short outings. None of them were more than 4 innings, I think, maybe 4 and a bit against the Mariners and the Angels. So there's some legitimate pushback there, I think, saying that, okay, maybe was that enough to say he got back on the mound and was himself? It is pretty borderline, I would say. for me, seeing him look like himself this spring as well, a normal spring would certainly help. I think I'll be feeling more confidence in late March than I am now for that reason. But I guess would you say that it was a convincing enough 3 starts, even given those caveats?
Yeah. I mean, the velocity, I'm just pulling up his velocity. It was down a mile an hour. I will give a little bit of, grace there. I mean, he's just coming off of the surgery. I don't think the plan was for him to go all out, right away, especially knowing it was just kind of like a way to get his feet wet again. I think he's going to come out in the spring and just look like a monster. And at that point, the price is going to be that. Then you're talking about Crochet price, if he
Right.
comes out and he's, looking like normal deGrom. So, but I love you,
honestly,
Dave. You're the man.
Yeah,
But I knew you were going to give
deGrom
me pushback on that one.
deGrom dropping his velo by a tick or two probably isn't even that bad. I mean, it kind of felt like he pushed things too far and that you just couldn't sustain a starter's workload with the new velocity that he was trying out after the 2020 season. So I'm actually not that concerned. Still, a healthy amount of worry for deGrom, but maybe want to make sure I still end up with him on some teams. Another pitcher who's been an ace for most of the last decade or so, Gerrit Cole, coming off an injury-filled down year, but there are caveats to both of those. He only made 17 starts due to an elbow injury, but it was elbow nerve inflammation, which I am not out here saying is a good thing, but it's not, a tendon issue. It's not the sort of issue that tends to lead to Tommy John surgery. So if you're saying, well, he had an elbow issue and he didn't get the surgery, well, it seems like he didn't need the surgery. It was a different injury. Problem is, he was worse. The strikeout rate was lower than we've seen it since 2017. It's still 25%, but not Gerrit Cole level. The ERA was also the worst it's been since then, 3.41. Same with the WHIP, 1.13. So are we viewing this as the beginning of the end for Cole? He's no longer somebody who has that ace upside. He's now in his age 34 season, starting to deal with more injuries, just not quite as effective? Or do you think that we could still get peak Gerrit Cole, and actually getting him in the mid 60s is quite a steal?
I don't think we should expect peak Gerrit Cole at this point. There are a lot of innings on that arm, and I don't know. I don't necessarily think of him as a huge injury risk. I mean, he pitched, he came back, he looked pretty good. Especially by the end of last year, the skills were ticking up. So, I don't have a ton of concern. I think he's fairly priced. I don't think he's like a huge discount. I don't. But I don't think that he's a bad pick here either. He's going around ADP of 60. And I'd be comfortable with him as my SP2. I haven't landed on him. Just there's some other guys I like slightly better. I'm kind of aiming for a little bit more, upside at that point. But I think he's a stable asset. I don't know. Is there a huge difference? Do you think, Eric, between him and like Corbin Burns? Kind of these guys that they're not going to wow you with Ks anymore, but they're steady. They're really good pitchers. Like, is there a big difference there?
I would say no, but I'm down on Corbin Burns, so I don't know if that has the same effect when I say it. But I hear what you're saying. He's probably, I guess what you're saying is there's a lot of pitchers who are, you're good enough to be your SP2 who would produce similar numbers, and you think that Gerrit Cole still can be a solid SP2 type?
Yep, for sure.
All right. We're coming up on an hour here, but I still got one or two more pitchers I want to talk about. Let's slip in one reliever here. Felix Bautista was one of the best closers in the game a couple years ago, but Tommy John surgery cost him all of last year. When we last saw him, it was a 1.48 ERA and a 46% strikeout rate. And it seems like he's got a chance to be ready from the start of the season. There were earlier notes in the offseason saying that the Orioles were going to slow play it, but last two notes on Felix Bautista are titled expected back for opening day and should be full go by opening day. So the news clearly trending in the right direction. Are you willing to have a guy coming off Tommy John surgery who we have not yet seen back in a competitive game? Are you willing to have him be your closer one, or do you think he needs to be on somebody else's team?
He could be on somebody else's team for sure. I'm not in on Bautista. When I saw his ADP in these early drafts, I was scratching my head. I just, and this is, I guess, kind of a theme of this episode, and maybe one takeaway that I'd like to impart for the crowd here, is that I think players coming off of an injury, like especially missing a full season, we've got to be leery of that. Think about the impact, like going from not playing for a full season to now going and playing a full 162 games. Like, I know he's a closer, so he's not playing all those games, but I mean, that's a huge adjustment. So there are questions like, is he going to be the same pitcher? He probably will be close, but we don't know. We haven't seen him. Is he physically going to be able to hold up? Like, okay, your arm is fixed, right? But are you going to have, like, is the rest of your body in good enough shape to withstand the rigors of a full baseball season? Like Edwin Diaz last year was kind of the poster child for this in my mind. Like, we were taking him in the third round, and I was one of those people. But I think and he was obviously a disappointment. And I think one of the takeaways for me was that, like, we should have expected like a little bit of an adjustment period, right? And he also had, I believe he had an injury, or I know there was at least a period of ineffectiveness where there was like, is he going to keep this job? But yeah, it just, like, it wasn't the same Edwin Diaz. Now I'm in on Edwin Diaz this season because now he's had a full season to get back in the swing of things. Bautista is kind of I'm thinking about him the same way. Like, I don't want to spend a 4th round pick, make him my closer one, and, not even knowing what he's looked, like not knowing what to expect. And they've also said that they're going to, like, ease him in. So are they going to let him go back-to-back games? Maybe the whole first half, they're like, okay, we're going to limit your back-to-backs or whatever. So, yeah, I'm off of Bautista. We're actually having, on the Fantasy Baseball Beat podcast, we'll be having Orioles beat writer on this evening. So go check us out. We'll talk more about that. But yeah, as far as Bautista, I'm pretty out at his price.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out and see what the beat writers are saying is going to happen there. I'm out on the price as well. Just anytime you're taking one of the earlier closers, you're passing up on some really good proven hitters and starting pitchers. And I really want to just know for sure that I'm getting a safe closer if I'm going to invest in an early closer. And unfortunately, Bautista isn't that this year. He will be next year, probably, if he gets through this year. Okay. But we're not there yet. I have one more name for you, but real quick, I want to mention Michael King. There's been a request to talk about him in the chat, and I think he fits. He's going right around Gerrit Cole, and certainly a risky, divisive pitcher of a little bit different sort. For him, the main thing people are pointing to is a big innings jump. He only took up starting late in the 2023 season, but he actually got up to 104 innings that year, 173 last season, though, is quite a big jump. Do you consider Michael King to be a pitcher with some significant downside? I would consider it modest. Sure, an innings jump is a risk, but not, every pitcher has got various risks, and innings jumps aren't the biggest sort of risk out there. So it's one I've been willing to take. Are you pro or anti Michael King, though?
I'm pretty neutral. I put him in the bucket. Like, I'll take him at cost if I need an SP2. I'm just trying to think. Well, let me throw this to you: Gerrit Cole or Michael King?
I think I'd be Michael King.
Okay.
I am worried about the last year's injury and just the age with Cole and the trajectory. I prefer the guy on the upward trajectory to the downward, but maybe that's dumb given how elite Cole was. Maybe I should ignore the trajectory and remember the underlying talent. How about you?
Yeah, I probably, for me, slight lean to Cole just because we have such a track record with him. Yeah, but I don't. Michael King is not someone I look at as like a major risk. I'd say maybe like a yellow flag if you wanted to like categorize it. But I mean, I think most pitchers are probably in that yellow flag just inherently. They have the yellow flag on them, so no, I don't have any major concerns. I think he's a good pitcher, man. Like a good a solid SP2.
All right. Let's wrap up the show with Roki Sasaki, I think one of the most divisive players out there this year. Roki Sasaki is going inside the top 100 after he landed with the Dodgers, and the upside here is huge. I mean, Sasaki as a prospect, as exciting as Paul Skeens, almost, I think is fair to say. I mean, this is a guy who could hit triple digits with his fastball. He had a perfect game with 19 strikeouts as a 20-year-old over in Japan, and then he followed that up with, I think, 8 perfect innings in his next start before getting pulled for innings restrictions. That's as elite as Sasaki is, but also he's been trending in the wrong direction recently. His fastball maybe now sits in the upper 90s instead of regularly touching triple digits. His strikeout rate is down, although still elite. Are you seeing Sasaki as somebody who could, be a potential first, second round pick next year? He's that elite of a prospect, and I absolutely want a piece of him now that he's landed with an excellent team in the Dodgers. Or are you seeing him as someone who has never thrown a single major league inning and has some pretty major innings risk? There was the talk that he'd previously contemplated Tommy John surgery, decided he didn't need it. There are massive downsides here with Sasaki to go along with the massive upsides. So what side of the equation do you fall on?
I'll just put this out. Like, I don't know. Like, I don't feel like I have an informed enough opinion for it to really matter. Like, I personally, I just won't be taking him. I just, the risk, everything that I'm hearing, and maybe it's one-sided, right? So I can't say that's the right thing, but like, I'm just hearing a lot of like detractors. I'm hearing about, he could have had Tommy John and his velocity was down. His effectiveness was down last year. Like, I just don't like the sound of that. I may feel really silly about that in a couple months. But I do think it's an adjustment, right? Coming over to the major leagues, and a guy like that, I almost feel like this could be like kind of I don't think the Dodgers are saying like, okay, we're bringing you in here and you're going to be the guy. Like, I think it was a little different with Yamamoto. Like, the amount they paid him, I think it was like, okay, you're going to come in and be a top 2 guy. Like, I feel like they might treat Sasaki with kid gloves. Already add in the fact that he's in a 6-man rotation, the injury risk that I keep hearing about with him. Just personally, it's not where I'm going to go. And I'm playing in, I think this is an important caveat. I'm primarily a 15-team player. I don't want to miss on a top 100 pick in a 15-team league. For those of you, though, who are playing 10 and 12 teamers, I think it's fine because the replacement value is going to be much in a 10-teamer. You could find another pitcher to replace Sasaki if you take him in the top 100. It's fine. And this should be fun. And I think rostering him is going to be a fun, like, it's an exciting thing. It's unknown. But yeah, just the style of player that I am and the leagues that I play in, it's just not a risk that I really want to take.
All right, so we've gone over a good number of names, many of whom you and I are both willing to take in some circumstances, many of whom we are still out on almost everywhere. If you have to sum it up, one pitcher and one hitter that we talked about today who you really think everybody should still be taken despite the risk, I think, is it going to be deGrom on the pitching side? And then who would your hitter be?
No, it's got to be Jazz. All about Jazz. Jazz and deGrom. Those are 2 of my guys this year for sure. Do I want them on the same team? Actually, I do have one team with both of them. So
all right.
We'll see. And Blake Snell, which was just a crazy, I don't know. I must have been like, there was something a little off with me that day. But yeah, I do have one team like that. But yeah, those are my guys this year.
All right. Well, that's the team that is not finishing between 4th and 12th, I would say. Either extreme for that one. All right. Well, this was a lot of fun. Thank you, Chris. Thank you for those of you who hung out in the chat. And remind people where they can find you.
Yes, you can find me on Twitter at Torres Takes. I also host a podcast called the Fantasy Baseball Beat. We're part of the Pitcher List podcast network. I host that over there with Mike Carter and Dave Funnel. So check us out. We drop a new episode every Saturday morning, and we interview beat writers and try to get you the best information you can to help you win your fantasy league. So go check us out. And thank you so much, Erik, for having me. And thank you everybody out there for listening and hanging with us in the chat.
All right. Thanks again, Chris. Thanks to our sponsor, Fantrax. And it'll be Todd and Clay tomorrow here on the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast.